this.
Oh, okay, good. I want to hear this.
Want to do it?
Can I sit down here?
Yeah.
All right.
Really tight quarters, though.
It is a bit, yeah.
Really tight quarters.
Yeah, let me, Dolly and I are here. We can switch out. Want to switch out, Dolly?
Sure. Turn off my phone. It's not my first rodeo.
Not your first rodeo.
No.
This is our first day with this toy. Nobody's played with it yet.
Uh-huh.
We'll get back to that later. If you want.
Interesting.
So, street epistemology. This is this thing we're trying with you.
Okay, sure.
We ask you about anything you believe is true.
Okay.
And I'm going to try really hard to not push back from an alternate perspective. I'm not going to try to change your mind about it one way or the other.
Right.
I'm just going to dig down into your reasons and how you weigh data to come to your reasons and things like that.
Sure.
So, tell me a thing you think is true in the world.
Well, first of all, you have to ask the question: what is truth?
Sure.
Right? Exactly. Right. So, what is truth? Truth is truth the concept that's learned, that's believed?
Mm-hmm.
Is truth the concept that's passed on? Because realities and truths change with times, change with our conditions. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, the truth I wanted to speak about today is about the COVID-19 vaccine. How I
Okay.
think it's very useful.
Okay.
So, we're going to pull back from the philosophical, epistemological ideas of truth and reality and what's right and wrong, and talk about this vaccine. So to me, I think the COVID-19 vaccine is essential in helping to curb this pandemic. Now, I know there are a lot of critics out there who basically believe that the vaccine may have problems. There are people that believe that they're being genetically altered by the vaccine, and that it's not perfect. But the truth is, we have a pandemic that has killed millions of people worldwide. And anytime you're dealing with a medical problem, whether it's having open heart surgery or even taking an antibiotic or taking any kind of therapy or intervention, it's always about risk versus benefit. And when we examine these treatments and these options and therapies, we look at risk versus benefit. Now, the vaccine might have side effects, and there may be some reported effects worldwide that we see that can happen. But the truth is, overall, the benefit way outweighs the risk. And right now, we know that using the vaccine is a way to curb the pandemic, flatten the curves, and help protect the masses most effectively. Is it a perfect vaccine? Of course not, because it was just developed. However, right now, it's the best thing we have. And given the side effect profile is still pretty small, it's still a great way of flattening the curve and protecting the most amount of people in the most effective way. In terms of a public health policy and protecting people from getting sick and from spreading it to other people who could get sick and even die. Because as you know, this vaccine, it actually does discriminate, because different people of different health backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds respond differently to the vaccine. Why? Because the vaccine attacks a protein called the ACE2 protein, which there are at least 30 different genetic types of ACE2 protein in humans. So different people from different parts of the world will express different types of ACE2 proteins, and the virus affects each of them differently. And so that's why we have people that have high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Those people seem to be higher risk when they contract COVID and more likely to have a bad outcome, like being hospitalized or dying. So how can we protect the most amount of people from this virus that actually attacks people in different ways? Is try to get everybody vaccinated and protected. So you could either do two things. One, prevent somebody from actually contracting it. Or number two, now we're having this Delta variant in this strain that you could actually attenuate the effects of the Delta strain in people who are vaccinated, because you have some type of immune response already. So from a public health point of view, and a way to protect the masses, we're talking about 350 million Americans and billions of people worldwide. Right now, the vaccine is essential.
Okay.
And that's kind of
Is that a fair summary? The COVID vaccine is essential to solve the pandemic?
It's essential to, attenuate the effects of the pandemic. When you say solve, you're doing absolutes. And of course, we never deal with absolutes in nature, because there's no absolutes. I can tell you how to prevent a heart attack, and I can give you guides to kind of lower your cholesterol and exercise and all that. Can I tell you 100% you're not going to have a heart attack in 5 years if you follow all those guidelines? I can't.
Right.
But what we can do is reduce the risk. Everything's about risk stratification
Okay.
and risk assessment. So right now, when we're dealing with a pandemic, there's a risk of contracting the disease. There's the risk of dying, the risk of long effects of that. And the best way we can mitigate, attenuate, and reduce the risk right now is the vaccines that we have out there. So that's why so when you say solve, that's a very broad term. So epistemologically, we have to be careful about the words we use when we're trying to market it, because I think what happens is when we start using absolute terms, it gives you people absolute ways to make absolute arguments, and then that leads to confusion, leads to doubt, and then that leads to people saying, well, I'm just going to adopt my own policy because I really don't want to, because those guys aren't convinced. But the truth is, there are no absolutes, but we do have data. And as you collect data, you analyze it and you say, hey, we can reduce the risk by this number percent, or this percent, or that percent. And this is kind of the whole idea behind medicine, is that we're using evidence-based and clinical evidence to try to determine whether or not it can reduce the risk. I mean, flying a plane or whatever that is overhead is risky too. But but albeit the small risk, people still get on airplanes.
Sure.
Right? So we take a risk when you cross the street every day, but we have to mitigate the risk versus the benefit. The benefit of flying a plane, you get to New York in 6 hours versus driving in 4 days, where you can still get hit in a road accident. So everything is risk benefit.
I think in that case, the road risk is much higher than
way
the plane
higher.
risk.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let me talk about risk. What risk? I am vaccinated, but let's assume I'm vaccinated, but let's assume I wasn't. What risk would I be taking compared to my twin that was vaccinated?
So you're saying you weren't and your twin was vaccinated?
Right. So there's two of me, one of them's vaxxed, one of them isn't. What risk is the unvaxxed person taking?
Okay, so right now we know that getting vaccinated with an mRNA vaccine can protect, has anywhere from 92 to 98% protection against getting infected within the next 6 months. So right there, that's a huge risk reduction versus the person
So
that's
roughly 1 in 20 reduction then in risk of a contraction disease for the vaccinated one.
Well, not one. No, I said 92 to 98% protection. So it's 19 out of 20.
Okay.
You're not going to get it, and as opposed to 1 out of 20. It'll reduce your risk of getting it to 1 out of 20 versus 20 out of 20. Or actually, when you look at the whole population, the number of people in the United States who contracted the virus, and you look at those percentages, so you're trying to reduce that from happening to you. So so it protects you 19 out of 20 of getting the virus. Yes.
Okay, so that's the personal protection. Is there another component, like is the one who's unvaccinated a danger to other people?
Of course, the one who's unvaccinated has potential to contract and spread to others unknowingly, not even aware that they have it. And, and that's the problem with this particular virus. As any cold virus or any kind of virus, is that you can have it and you can be contagious and not be aware of it. And over time, there's been different viruses have different levels of being contagious and different levels of virulence. So, like chickenpox is notorious. You could be in the same room with somebody with chickenpox, you can contract it, right?
Yeah.
Varicella is highly contagious.
Very much.
So the COVID is it's pretty virulent. It can spread around by being, if you're within 6 feet of somebody that has it and they're coughing, you can definitely contract it. You can get it in droplets that go into your eyeballs. You can get it in droplets that land on your hand. You can get it on surfaces. So yes, somebody who's unvaccinated who gets infected is almost weaponized to go out and infect other people, unwittingly, but that's what happens.
In round numbers, would you say that the risk difference between my unvaccinated twin and me is greater or less to my vaccinated twin as their danger to everybody else? Do you think the individual danger is greater or less than the public health danger?
The individual ability to infect other people?
Yeah, I'm sort of looking at the danger of like how many people are endangered, how much. If I'm endangering 100 people at 1%, I'd say that's about one life danger. Okay. Something like that.
So once again, depends on the individual and how much he gets around, right? So if a person decides not to get vaccinated and locks himself in his house and quarantines him or herself and decides I'm not going to come in contact with humans, of course they're going to reduce their exposure, reduce their risk. But for a public health policy to say, okay, all 350 million people just stay home and let's not forget the vaccine, just everybody stay home for a year until this thing goes away. I mean, you try to get people to follow the speed limit, let alone try to follow something like that.
Indeed.
So the whole idea is that we have to think about broad terms from a public health policy, from population studies. You have people in large, crowded communities, and so if one person is unvaccinated in that community and they contracted and they live in a building with all kinds of people around them, they're going shopping, they're in contact with 50, 100, 200 people a day, then you could potentially infect all those people. There are many stories of weddings and gatherings where we're contact tracing. They found one person had a wedding in Connecticut and infected 400 people that she came in contact with over a weekend. I mean, and then it's like that exponential. They told two friends and they told they infected and so on and so on. This is how this whole pandemic started. I mean, it came into America and spread across the whole country. How? By contact. I mean, we just saw the effect of unchecked spread of the vaccine. If you look at the United States and look at cases, all last year before the introduction of the vaccine, look at the cases every month, every week, the number of deaths. I mean, it was very grim news we'd see in the news. On no matter what, even the most commercialized or politicized news agency, where it's Fox or CNN, the numbers couldn't lie. They're very, very frightening numbers and sobering numbers to show how fast this thing spread across the country, across the globe. And we didn't see those curves flattening until the vaccine was introduced, and that's why you saw now we're actually able to even be here in Runyon Canyon, where I remember I lived here for 20 years actually, and this thing was like locked up. You couldn't come here. So you've seen it happen by putting the vaccine out, and so this is kind of what we want to continue doing. We want to keep it happening because I think people kind of forget. It's like I'm a cardiologist. I'm a doctor. Okay, so a lot of people come to me in the ER and they're having chest pain. They look me in the eye and they go, "Dude, don't let me die, man. I don't want to die." And I say to them more often than not, I say, "You're not going to die today." And it's like you're here. We have a very good chance of getting out of this. What I'm worried about is a year from now, you're going to come in the office and say, "I can smoke now, right, man?" Because the fear of what happened in the moment is in the distant memory, and then he'll say, "Well, what's a cigarette, right?" And that's what got him there to begin with. And what's happening now is that people are forgetting how scared they were and how those numbers were scary and how people were dying. Yeah. And they were dying horribly. It's like watching somebody drown slowly over a month and you can't save them. And it's a horrible death. And I could tell you also, I'm a COVID survivor. I contracted double COVID pneumonia from patient exposure before the vaccine came out. And I was hospitalized, and I had to sit there, and I had to focus only on breathing. And let me tell you something, when your life gets distilled down to a simple thing like, let me take a deep breath and be able to hold it in, and let me be able to exhale and not feel like I'm struggling, suddenly everything comes into focus. Like, wow, that's a place all of us, really don't want to be in, that we take for granted. Air. Yeah. Another high-risk aircraft.
Yes. Yes, factor of 5.5 or so compared to other light aircraft.
Right.
How much risk is the vaccinated one taking? I don't mean the comparative risk. I think the comparative risk is an obvious, huge one. But how much risk am I taking when I take the vaccine?
In terms of what? In side effects? In terms of getting infected? Or in terms of...
How about just chance of dying from it? I've heard numbers like there's 3 people from like all the vaccines that have been confirmed to have gotten a blood clot.
Right.
And how many millions? And so that's some fraction less than a million for that one.
Right. So the numbers are very small. I mean, of course, we're going to hear about the bad things.
Sure.
They're going to be written about, the myocarditis, the blood clots, the death, the seizures. Yeah, correct. But the numbers are small. We're talking about maybe less than 1 in 10,000, 1 in 50,000, 1 in 100,000. In fact, it may even be smaller than that. I mean, right now, what we're doing at this point, we're collecting data, and people are reporting, you know, all, and fortunately or unfortunately, you know, the most untoward effects, the most terrible effects, get publicized and talked about a lot. So at least we know about them, but they'll still come out to be a fraction, a small fraction, like 0.001, and that magnitude. I mean, the thing to think about, they're probably surveilling us, is what it is. It must be the FBI, forever bothering Italians. No, anyway. The thing is,
It's LAPD.
Yeah, sure. But here's the thing. So years ago, there was a polio vaccine.
Yes.
And polio was a horrible, debilitating disease. I mean, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a public example, but many people privately suffered from polio where they couldn't breathe, they were paralyzed, they were in homes, they were marginalized. And then they came up with the Salk vaccine. And the initial vaccine was a live virus vaccine. And sure, did kids contract polio from the vaccine? Yes, there was a very small number of kids that contracted polio. But when you look at the big picture, how many kids didn't get polio anymore, like that risk of polio was almost wiped out versus those handful of kids that got polio, that was worth taking that chance, because now you took polio off the map. Now, a couple years...
That sounds orders of magnitude more dangerous than the current thing that we're talking about.
There you go. And then here we go, the Sabin vaccine, the little sugar cube used to give the kids, was way safer, was a dead vaccine. And guess what? That side effect didn't happen anymore. So yes, is this vaccine today perfect? Of course not. But is it the best we have? Yes. And everything else, you're trading the risk versus the benefit. And this is why we're using this particular vaccine at this moment. Now, 2-3 years from now, there'll be something which should be very well designed, very perfected, something that may even respond to the different variants of COVID, and also something may be more specific to the individuals, as all of us are genetically different in our ability to respond and handle COVID. And that's the thing that we'll probably see. And you pull back the lens, because I was in med school, it was HIV. And I worked at Bellevue Hospital in New York, and Bellevue Hospital had a hard time getting residents and interns to want to train there because they were afraid of catching AIDS just working in the hospital, because they were afraid, if I work in a hospital with AIDS, I'm going to catch AIDS.
Well, you don't know what the vectors are.
There you go. So people were afraid. And I remember my professor of medicine, the chief of medicine, a guy named Saul Farber. He's probably gone now. This old white-haired guy used to rock when he spoke, and he says, "We are privileged to be here treating the public during this epidemic, because we are going to treat people who need us the most, and we're going to learn so much about this disease now that's going to help us understand diseases from here on." So he says when he was an intern, it was pneumonia, it was penicillin. It was I mean that's how far back he went. And he goes, and we learned about pneumonia and penicillin, and we understood antibiotics. You're going to understand about viruses. And look at how much we've come from in treating HIV to giving those drugs which knocked out your pancreas and liver and kidneys, to now giving drugs where people could live years and years and years with low viral load, and they could have normal lives, and then they could not infect people. And the same thing with understanding viruses with COVID. I was hospitalized. I got remdesivir. And that helped me a lot. Remdesivir was developed for
Remdesivir is medicine?
Remdesivir is an intravenous antiviral drug that was initially developed for Ebola virus.
Nice.
And then they did some studies with Ebola virus, but luckily Ebola wasn't really enough of it wasn't a major epidemic, so the use of that drug kind of got put aside. But because Ebola behaved, so the rule with viruses are, the deadlier the virus, the harder it is to spread, because people die before they can spread it. So that's why COVID's such a dangerous virus. It's deadly kind of long term, not short term. Ebola kills you within a couple of days of getting infected, maybe a week getting infected. COVID could take 10 days, 15 days, 20 days, and that gives people a chance to run around. So I got remdesivir intravenously to treat me, and so here it is. What we learned from trying to understand this deadly Ebola virus years ago is now used to help me and other people like me who had COVID pneumonia. So the same thing, the way we understand this mRNA technology, which people are saying, oh, it's altering your DNA, which it's not, because your DNA is intact. What happens is that when DNA replicates, when your genetic code replicates, or when DNA encodes for the proteins in your body, the proteins that make your eyes blue, the proteins that make your muscles, it uncoils, and something called messenger RNA creates that protein. That's how we make protein. That's how we keep making heart muscle, stomach muscle, skin muscle, skin cells. And so all this it's an mRNA that's going to make a protein which looks like the virus, the spike protein in the virus, to activate your immune system. And
just that part.
Just that part.
None of the dangerous part.
It doesn't get encoded. You're not genetically altered. You're not stamped. You're not traceable. You're not all that. But we learned with understanding genetics and mRNA to make this vaccine, and we're going to use this technology now in the future probably to treat other diseases. And imagine one day you get an mRNA that makes you no longer have high blood pressure or make you no longer have high cholesterol. So this has given us an opportunity to understand ourselves.
Okay, so what you just told me there was that the mRNA does not change our DNA.
It does not.
But I assume it goes into the cell. The process happens inside the cell?
So yes, it goes into the cell.
Goes into the cell, and at the same conditions that the other DNA is being replicated, or perhaps it's... are those conditions always available?
So the DNA is in the nucleus, okay? And then outside the nucleus, in the cytoplasm, there's these things called ribosomes. They're like the factories where proteins get assembled.
Oh, okay. So
the mRNA, messenger RNA, it brings the message from the nucleus out to the ribosome. Say, hey, we got to make more of this protein, or hey, we got to make this, hey, we got to make that. And your DNA is constantly making proteins.
Because we're a eukaryote, you mean it's not happening in the center, it's happening out here?
Happening in these little apparatuses called ribosomes, exactly, and that's what they happen.
Okay, so we don't have to wait for the cell to split or something else like that?
No, it's happening in cells.
Is it happening like a virus in that it reproduces a whole lot and then it busts the cell open to get them out?
No. The protein it makes then goes out to where it's needed.
How does the protein get out of the cell?
There's a thing called exocytosis where proteins that are created get transported outside the cell to where they're needed.
Okay.
So for example, like if you need to make if you start working out and training your heart muscle, your muscles get bigger. So you start making more muscle protein. So you can do that. So it doesn't alter the DNA. It doesn't incorporate into your DNA and make you different. That doesn't happen.
Okay. So it's no part of my future DNA is modified, and it's not busting the cells out like the virus does.
Correct.
I assume the virus does bust the cell when it's finished, right?
Because the virus basically inserts through the ACE2 protein, inserts its genetic material.
So the ACE2 protein is a protein on the surface of the cell that allows entry?
Correct.
Thank you.
And the ACE2 protein, remember, is actually a protein which actually is on the surface of every blood vessel cell in your body that actually helps your blood vessels be intact. It helps vessels dilate. It helps defend the blood vessels against getting plaque formation.
Okay.
It helps keep the vessels nice and relaxed so you don't get high blood pressure. So people that have abnormal ACE2 protein, they have high blood pressure, they have heart disease, they have diabetes, they have plaque. So the thing is, this protein is very ubiquitous. It's everywhere in all these very important cells. Also in very important, it's also in the lung tissue, the lung cells, the bronchial cells. So this virus actually attacks that particular cell as a port of entry to get into the cell, and then injects its genetic material and takes over the machinery of your cell. And then when the cell explodes, it releases even more viruses. And that's how it. So it's just kind of like a vampire. It jumps in, takes over your body, and then makes you a weapon to infect others, infect other cells, and spread that way.
Okay. So theoretically, we could encode any protein into some mRNA, give it to me, and my cells could make the protein and distribute it through my body?
That's the exciting part. So, for example, there's a disease called cystic fibrosis, where people are born with inability to make a protein called surfactant. This is stuff that makes your lungs pliable, right? So our lungs, if you take your lungs out of your body, they're like two spongy little things. They're really kind of lightweight, and they're spongy, they're easy to squeeze. And the reason why, because they have to inflate and deflate with air with just small changes of pressure. Think about the amount of pressure just to inflate a balloon, how much hard you got to work. The work of your lungs is like maybe less than 10% of that. They're that pliable. Because it makes a protein called surfactant, we keep the lungs be pliable and stretchable like that. People with cystic fibrosis are missing that gene. So years ago, they came up with a technology, which we're still kind of using now, by delivering a virus to people with cystic fibrosis. It was an adenovirus, it was an old flu virus, and in that virus they constructed a virus and encoded the code for that surfactant protein. And patients would inhale this stuff, which would deliver it to their lungs, and then suddenly your lung cells get infected with this virus that you engineered, And instead of making virus protein, it made surfactant protein.
Oh, nice.
So that's the way to do it. So now with this mRNA technology, we could do something that might be even more sustainable than take an inhaler every now and then. You could actually give something that could continue making the protein for like maybe months and months and months, as opposed to like a few weeks and getting a retreatment. So this technology is going to open doors to other treatments, you know, and of course, like I said, you know, the problem with all these drugs is that, you know, there's billion-dollar drug companies inventing them and creating them and competing to try to be the first guy there at the finish line, the first woman at the finish line. And the problem is that creates social mistrust and cynicism, because, hey, it's a billion-dollar company making this drug, and their goal is to try to get their drug out first, and we have to be, you know, cautious and a little skeptical. But with looking at data and using proper scientific method and actually keep analyzing data that way and using evidence-based medicine and not People Magazine or USA Today to make decisions, we can hopefully, you know, get to the next hurdle of trying to having people read good science again, good news again, and practice good medicine again. I think this whole pandemic has, because of this, the social, political, and even economic and demographic fracturing that it did, is going to help us maybe understand moving forward how to approach this problem, how to understand science, and who to listen to and who not to listen to, or how to analyze data, which is good medicine and good science versus bad medicine and bad science.
Thank you. Thank you. I have almost a formulaic end question. This is a hypothetical to see how movable you are.
Okay.
So imagine we're not talking about COVID anymore.
Sure.
It's a couple of years in the future. The COVID thing has been resolved to whatever level long term. And there's a new disease. And then after some time, there's a new vaccine.
Right.
Now the question for you is, what information would move you to take the vaccine? And what information would move you to not take the vaccine in that hypothetical? What would make you think it was not worth take? I guess that one's the ones, the two make, well, anyway, you tell me. What would move you to either side of that choice?
Well, like everything else, any disease, any treatment, you know, because I guess as a cardiologist, there's always new studies, new clinical trials, new drugs, and basically you want to make sure the study they use was properly randomized in the right way, and that when you analyze the data, that the groups are equal. You're comparing an apple to an apple, not an orange to an apple, and that there's actually demographics were represented equally. Because, you know, I could tell you in cardiovascular medicine, you know, for many decades, a lot of these conclusions were done on VA patients in the 70s and 80s and 60s, actually. And so what you could really say is that we made conclusions about 65-year-old Caucasian men that lived in Minnesota and tried to apply them to like a little old Chinese lady, you know, from Alhambra, which doesn't really, the genetics aren't the same, the disease doesn't manifest the same way. So when you look at any study, any clinical trial, any new intervention, you have to take a look at the study, see how the study was constructed, make sure it was properly constructed, unbiased. There's no selection bias. There's all these different ways that you can actually look at data, or a company could report data. So yes, you have to look at it with the same critical eye, and also with the same discovery, as we say, because I also testified against a drug company in the past, and in discovery they got to show you all their data, but a good study or a good trial has to show you all their data. And if the data shows that yes, there is a definite improvement with statistical significance, there's a good benefit, and the side effect profile is low enough and acceptable enough, yes, then it would lead you to go ahead and go for that vaccine for that new virus that we haven't concocted yet.
So for you then, you take that skill that you've learned in medical school, in sense, to read studies and to understand how they can fail, to be able to push you in the positive. So what would the study show that would push you to the negative?
Well, if you did a study that showed that there really wasn't a benefit, or if the benefit was only limited to certain subgroups, or if you see if they do a study where, like, I do this all the time, I look at any study, even cardiology studies, or, you know, we always look at the data. I teach my students count the bodies. So if a study was designed to enroll 8,000 patients, 4,000 in each group, at the end of the study, there better be 8,000 patients we're analyzing. If they say 1,000 dropped out, you got to ask yourself, well, why'd they drop out? Because maybe 1,000 people dropped out because the drug made them sick or gave them a horrible side effect, and then they don't count them at the end. Well, that's called selection unbiased. You
Yeah,
can't do that.
totally.
So what you have to do is, if you look at data and you find that the results aren't as robust, or if you think there's something imperfect in the way they counted or the way they excluded people, okay, then you could say, you know what, this is not a very clean study, you know, and maybe we should look again. And this happens all the time in medicine. I mean, I could tell you. Here's an anecdote. I was in my training and research, and we were enrolling patients in a study for heart failure. So when your heart muscles weaken, they can't contract, your lungs fill up with water, and you're drowning in your own fluid. So there was an intravenous drug. It was a VA study, ironically. And we had all these vets on these little cassettes giving them an IV drug, and this drug was designed to dilate their blood vessels. And the thought was, hey, if you dilate the blood vessels, you make it easier for the heart to work. Okay, so I was up in San Francisco, and we enrolled a bunch of patients. And my job was to connect them to this thing, stick the IV in, and then go visit them at various Air Force bases in California with these transport planes rocking their barracks overhead as they took off. I think back then I think it was maybe in Desert Storm back then, because the planes were taking off every hour, like thunderous loud. And I'm trying to listen to their blood pressure and heartbeats.
Oh my!
Pretty challenging. And after a couple of months, the safety committee, which reviews how people are doing, they say, hey, we're finding out that most people we connected this IV drip are dying.
Oh my!
So they had to stop the study, and this was a drug that took about 10 to 15 years in development, which the average drug takes about that long from the time you patent a molecule to the time you actually try it. It's about 10 to 15 years, and today it's about 2 billion. Back then it was like probably 300 million, but that's how much they invest in these new drugs. And we had to call people up and say, guys, I got to come disconnect you because this drug is like not turning out well, and people are actually getting sick, and some are dying. And every single vet I called off, was this a family show? Can I curse on it? And it was said, screw off, get away from me. And I go, sir, you know, you go, listen, man, I've had an erection for 10 days. I ain't giving this stuff up for nobody. The drug was intravenous Viagra, sildenafil.
Oh my!
And so I called Pfizer, said, listen, you know, these guys don't want to give up the drug because they're saying they're having erections for like 10 days. And so Pfizer had a failure at the time for heart disease. And then they took a look at their data and say, wait a second, what if we reformulate this into a pill and make it for erectile dysfunction? And then became a multi-billion-dollar drug on a failure.
Oh my!
Because they looked at the data and said, hey, it's not really good for this, but in this subgroup it might be good for this. And they were lucky. They had a win out of that. But other drugs haven't been that lucky, where we say, hey, you know, it doesn't work. Or it's not worth the cost, or the benefit's not there, or the endpoint they're looking for. Sometimes the endpoint, you got to ask yourself, if you design a study that's supposed to keep people alive, then your endpoint better be death versus life. You know, once you start softening the endpoints, well, he feels better, or not in the hospital, or able to walk more, then you know they're hedging. So look at every data and make sure the endpoint is the same, is the exact one they started off with, or the desired endpoint that you would want to start off with. With a vaccine, you get sick or not get sick. Does it keep you from dying or not die? These are important things. There's that same critical eye. You have to look at that. In the same way the public should look at that when they see a study come out. You don't want to look at People magazine. You don't want to look. You don't want to hear Fox News tell you about it. You want to have somebody read it from Nature magazine or New England Journal of Medicine, or like a peer-reviewed journal that's hard to get published in, because they have critics looking at that and making sure that only good quality things get in there. That's how you have to do it, and that's how we critically analyze anything new that comes out. And most of the stuff that comes out doesn't work. Honestly, I'd say probably. I say 2 out of 3 things that come out, the findings are kind of soft, and not convincing, or findings may wind up changing in the future. So that's what we have to look at that.
Big replication crisis.
There you go.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Thank you.
Yeah,
I've really enjoyed this conversation. Full disclosure, I was about 5 weeks ago in the ICU dealing with exactly the lung thing you described. I'm having my antibiotics.
Yeah, I was noticing that. I don't want to call it on the air, but
it's okay. I've been clear with people about it. And so this question about how to deal with medicine, how to trust, how to learn, I had real bad medical hesitancy.
I hear you.
And
no, it's
I really hate needles.
I hate them too. And let me tell you something. There's a lot of pressure from pharmaceutical companies to get people to use their drugs. And one of the reasons why I got to be an expert against some of these in some big cases against big pharma is because a lot of one situation was a drug rep turned attorney that started like using me as an expert, and he said, I came to you because I knew I couldn't bullshit you. He said, come into your office, try to buy your office food and bring you like, whatever. And you would sit there and say, tell me about your drug. And then you ask me all these questions I couldn't answer, and you kick me out. And I'd be like, yeah, that's me.
Excellent.
So you remember that about me. So that's me. I'm like a drug rep nightmare. But because it can't be from marketing. And that's the other thing. Doctors, the way a doctor should adopt a new practice or a new medicine is from randomized clinical trials, evidence-based medicine, not from a drug rep buying you dinner or walking around and offering you to take you on some trip or whatever. That's the least way anyone should get information. That's like the worst way, actually. So you have to be critical, and you can't be influenced by marketing. And I think, as an aside, the worst legislation ever passed was that which allowed pharmaceutical companies to do direct-to-consumer marketing. Because what it did, it allowed them to spend billions on marketing, which is why your drugs cost so much. And number two, it makes the public sitting at home or listening to to your podcast or radio, listen to some guy talk about how this drug is going to make you smile better, have sex better, and live better, and then the auctioneer talking real fast about all the side effects, and then it makes that person say, I want that drug, and they come and they go around asking it by name because they've been influenced by the same marketing team and advertising team that used to work for like Philip Morris and those guys back in the days are now working for pharmaceutical companies, getting the public to say, I want that drug. And they put pressure on these doctors to prescribe that drug or lose the patient. So that should be taken. I think if we took that off the air, direct-to-consumer marketing, because it's really not designed to educate, it's designed to promote and sell.
Oh, yeah.
That would be a great
I get so
thing.
many 5-second ads on YouTube that are basically just, here's a drug name. Oh,
exactly. And the drug names are
They
sexy
don't even say
now.
what it's for.
Exactly. They're sexy
Check your
now.
doctor if you need to.
Exactly. Little smiley face jumping around. Yeah. And if you did that,
Gross.
drugs would be cheaper. Because all the money spent on advertising and these reps buying dinners and doing all this stuff could be maybe to help make the drug cheaper and more affordable. Because what a sad thing is we have these great technology that comes out in preventing heart disease, but no one could afford it.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Sure. Good stuff. Amen. Good.
Enjoy.
So how long? So you were sick a month ago, you said?
Yeah, I had a bacterial infection, and it got a bit systemic and involved my lungs and abscesses around my liver.
Oh boy!
And so a lot bad, and I probably waited a month after I should have known better to go into the hospital.
Wow.
So I took a lot more risk than I should have, and they managed to clear the whole thing. I was only in ICU for a couple of days. We were very concerned because I was working on about this much of my lungs.
Right.
When like
And your
that.
heart valves were okay? Didn't go to heart valves?
I was good. Heart's good. 12 leads fine. There was an antibiotic that was having a QT interval issue for me, and we got me off that and onto a different one that seems to be just as effective at killing the bug, and none of that. So I'm very happy not to have the QT problem.
Cool. Yeah, that's not good to have a QT problem.
Yeah. I even learned what a QT problem was.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. You cause arrhythmia, sudden death.
And I can count to 12 leads now.
But they've done an echo ultrasound of your heart, right?
Yeah,
The
they
heart
did.
valves?
They did. Yeah, they did that too.
Cool.
And on that one, they're just like, oh yeah, you're totally fine. I have a clean bill of cardio.
Perfect. And you've been vaccinated or not vaccinated?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
As soon as I was available, and I'm looking forward to the booster.
Good.
I am 100 times more motivated by the public health argument than I am the personal protection argument. The personal protection argument would have been enough for me to vaccinate,
Right.
maybe by a factor of 2.
Right.
But the public health, protecting my wife, protecting protecting all the
Exactly.
people in the world,
Everyone. Yeah.
that's hugely bigger. I would be willing to take literally 100 times more risk and be happy about it.
I mean, it's crazy. The state of Florida, state of Texas, the state of Georgia, they opened up way early, but didn't enforce vaccines. And so suddenly now they're having all these rebounds and people getting sick everywhere.
It's a huge thing.
Yeah, and let me tell you, and so I work with Sean Penn with CORE,
Mm-hmm.
and we would go to Georgia, and here's the thing: in certain communities, it is fear and mistrust of the government, fear and mistrust of something like a vaccine. So you go to certain communities and say, hey, if the government wants you to take it, say, you ain't gonna put that in my arm, because they don't trust
Right.
government coming down and doing that.
They don't trust.
And suddenly they're going around infecting that community.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is, and there's people say, well, it's a suburb of Georgia. Well, they're over there and we're over here. They think it's like talking about another country. It's sad.
Or maybe talking about it like it's a tiny minority rather than a third of the country.
Correct. And that's the sad part.
That's the sad part. I thank you for this.
Sure. My niece is upset when she looked at it.
Okay,
Hopefully she made it to the top.
good.